Well, I can kick us off and we can do a quick round of introductions from the ODOT team. And then I don't know who's running our slideshow here, but oh, perfect. If you can get that teed up to go, that would be awesome. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tia Williams. I'm actually the communications director for the Urban Mobility Office, which is a newer office within ODOT. We'll go ahead and do quick intros with the rest of the ODOT team, and then we'll get started on the presentation. Hannah, do you want to go?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having us. Hannah Williams. I'm in the Urban Mobility Office, and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for the toll program. Josh?
Yeah, hey, I'm Josh Channel. I'm a transportation planner and congestion pricing specialist. I work for the engineering firm WSP. In non-COVID times, I work out of our downtown Portland office, as does the majority of the team. I'm kind of the technical muscle for today's presentations and questions. And for the past 2 years, I've worked almost exclusively on this project with the Oregon Toll Program. So excited to be here. Thanks for having us. And Ariella?
Hi, everyone. I'm Ariella. I will be supporting the Oregon Toll team today by running the presentation and by taking notes. You hopefully can see my screen now.
Awesome. Great. So we'll get into it. You can just go to the next slide now. All right. So just by way of background, and how we got here. I actually might back up just a little bit before 2017. Really in 2015, 2016, Governor Brown hosted a transportation visioning panel, which really laid the kind of groundwork for House Bill 2017. And one of the things and key takeaways from that visioning panel was really identifying some of the problems that we're seeing in the Portland Metro region, especially with the growth that we're anticipated to have. So that really kind of laid the foundation. House Bill 2017 really identified the core projects as priorities in the region. And then just this past session, House Bill 3055 passed, which allowed for financial flexibility to really deliver on the core projects. And then I'd also say it was really kind of an affirmation from the legislature of the identified priorities alongside some partners who really showed up and advocated for the passage of that bill. I would add in there in 2020 was when the Urban Mobility Office was created. And it was really created as a way for the agency to deliver projects, but also I think address equity, climate, safety in a more comprehensive way. So one of the things that we're trying to focus on more is really not taking projects as individual projects, right? But really looking at how they impact the entirety of the system. So we'll be getting into a little bit more of that, but wanted to set that context. Next slide. Okay, so this is just outlining some of the challenges that we're seeing. So not only is Oregon having a shortfall in terms of the ability to fund these projects, we also know that we have severely outdated infrastructure. So there's a need to sort of update that along with the growth that we're seeing as a region. So we know the demand on the system is growing. I think it's we're anticipating a 23% population growth in the Portland metro area by 2040. And so, again, one of those things around just given that reality of, the huge population growth, if we care about equity, we care about climate, we can't do nothing. And so that's really where this comprehensive congestion management and mobility plan come into play. So next slide. So again, just kind of building on the challenge here, this graphic on the left shows traffic volumes as recently as May of this past year. We're working on getting updated numbers for the fall, but this really shows that we're back to pre-pandemic traffic volumes. We saw a dip there for a bit, but traffic is right back to where we were pre-pandemic. And then on the left, again, just acknowledging how transportation is a huge cost for many households right behind housing. So I think that just really helps frame up some of the challenges that we're seeing in our communities. Next slide. So with the creation of the Urban Mobility Office set forth by the Oregon Transportation Commission, this is really what our charge is. We are especially tasked with reducing congestion in the Portland metro area. We know it's a huge problem. We have some of the worst bottlenecks in the country, and again, equity, doing business differently, engaging communities differently as they're participating on our projects, and then also in how we are, approaching contracting and other things. I would say safety is a huge one for us. We have severely outdated infrastructure. Like I said, we know that our region is at the risk of a major Cascadia event. So updating that infrastructure is huge. And climate change. I mean, we know transportation is a huge leading cause of emissions. And so really getting our projects to a place, and along with congestion pricing, which we'll hear about more here in a second from the toll team, but really figuring out how we can work together to reach our climate goals. Next slide. So here's like an overarching view at some of the core projects that we're talking about, along with the toll project areas. So we've got I-205 improvements and I-5 Boone Bridge. Both of those feature kind of key safety enhancements along with some seismic enhancements. The 217 auxiliary lanes, the I-5 Rose Quarter Improvement Project, and then up north, the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. So we are incredibly busy in the Urban Mobility Office. There's a lot going on, along with, as you can see on the segment of 205, the I-205 toll project, and then the Regional Mobility Pricing Project, which is what we really wanted to dive in with you all today about. Next slide. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Josh or Hannah.
Great. Yeah, I'll grab it from here. Thank you. So this is a graphic that shows kind of the balance point that we're trying to hit in the middle here with the toll rate. We have dual objectives on this project, which is to manage congestion and to generate revenue for priority transportation projects and things that help our region move around better. If you turn the dial too high to the right to look for more revenue, you drive a lot of people off the system and you end up with some pretty bad local impacts. And if you go too far to the left, then the system doesn't pay for itself and you don't have the investments you need. You don't have the revenue you need to make the investments that you want to see in the region. So keep that balance point in mind as we move forward. Next slide. Okay, so a couple key terms, tolling general terms. Lots of things can go into that, but in general, it's a fee on drivers. Can be charged to go over a bridge. That's what we're most used to. You stop at a toll booth, you throw some coins in, or you talk to the operator for a second. Congestion pricing is a type of tolling, which specifically uses higher costs at peak hours to try to nudge travel behaviors in some different ways. We'll talk about that in a second. But it all fits under the umbrella of toll and tolling. And congestion pricing is very specifically what we're trying to do with the Regional Mobility Project. Next slide, please. So let's get a little bit into how does this work. So I'm an East Coaster, lots of experience with toll booths. The system that we are proposing is very different. It's all electronic. Drivers have an account. That account is linked to a transponder in your car. It's like a sticker. You travel under a gantry, which is that blue thing shown over the highway here. At full speed, you don't slow down. There's a reader that records the travel and charges your account. If you don't have an account, there's a camera that captures a license plate. Let's say you're from Washington, D.C. and you're in Washington County, you don't have an account locally. The cameras on the gantries record the license plate and a bill gets mailed to you, or there's usually an option to text in and get instructions for how to pay at the time. So that's how it works in other regions. One thing that I want to note on this slide, before you go, Mariella, is that what we're proposing in Oregon on I-5 and I-205 is tolling all lanes. So that's That's different than what you see in some other regions where they have express lanes that are much higher priced. It's a single lane outside the general purpose lanes. That's not what we're proposing here. We're proposing tolling all lanes of I-5 and I-205 in our study limits. So so now you can go to the next slide. How much does it cost? We don't know yet. Toll rates have to balance that managing congestion and earning some revenue. And we have a lot of analysis to do before we know what the rates are that we're going to propose. But we can tell you that they're not going to be a surprise. You will know the cost of a trip before you go. The toll rates are going to follow a published schedule, higher rates at more congested times a day, lower rates off peak. The hope is that this results in a slight shift in travel behaviors that can yield some big benefits. The shift is what we're looking for with congestion pricing. So another piece that we know about the pricing is that we know that there's going to be accommodations for those who can't afford the toll. HB 3055 was recently passed and signed. It established that there must be discounts or toll credits for low-income users. But since we don't know how much the toll rates are going to be yet, we don't know what sort of credits are going to apply. Stick with us, keep learning, stay involved as we travel this road together. So next slide. Why are we doing this? Tia touched on this a little bit, but we know from other regions that congestion pricing can have some really powerful effects. We expect to see much more efficient travel during peak hours, fewer greenhouse gas emissions, fewer air pollutants, funding to support other efforts that can further reduce congestion and improve mobility. And fundamental to this entire program, and Hannah will get into this later, so we want that improved mobility to be equitable and safe. That's just fundamental to the DNA of this. Next slide, please. So let's address one of the big concerns that our local partner agencies have had, and we have them as well, diversion. Specifically the type of diversion where people get off the highway to avoid a toll and create safety concerns and congestion on local streets. So there's, let's touch on that for a second. There's already a lot of diversion going on in the region. Anyone that has been on Barber Boulevard during rush hour knows that. There's already a lot of people getting off the highways to avoid the congestion during rush hour. But drivers do have travel choices. They can carpool. They can travel at different times of day. They can take a different mode, transit, bike, ped. They can decide to shop locally and not get on the highway at all. Some will choose to drive on a road where there isn't a toll. We know that. But with much more efficient highways, we think that a lot will choose not to get off the freeway, but instead will choose to pay the toll as long as it's a reasonable fee. Again, that's that balance point. So, and a small nudge in that travel behavior can result in really big benefits to our quality of life. So next slide, please. So it can also have big economic benefits for our region as we continue to grow. We know how great it is to live here, but the region's expected to grow a lot and add a lot of new residents and jobs. Our system is not working perfectly right now, and unless we act, it's going to get worse. Congestion is costing our economy a lot of lost productivity. The professional drivers and service providers, they need to know how long it's going to take to get to where they need to go to their customers. Right now, that's highly variable. But if we can increase the reliability and spread out that congestion a little bit, we think we can accommodate this growth. So next slide. What does it pay for? Congestion pricing will provide the state with revenues to deliver some of the core projects that Tia showed on the map before. It also can include investments in transit, multimodal, health and safety impacts, programs and investments to address people that are experiencing low incomes. So next slide. How soon is this happening? There's two projects. I'm going to go into each of them briefly, but there's two projects under the Oregon Toll Program, the I-205 Toll Project and the Regional Mobility Pricing Project, which is the focus of today. The I-205 Toll Project is moving ahead first and pretty fast. The project is beginning its environmental review phase. The earliest tolling could begin, as shown there, the little dot on the top right of the screen. 2024 is what we're looking at. And I'll talk about the limits of that project in just a sec. The Regional Mobility Pricing Project is in a much earlier stage of development. It's in a planning phase right now. It's also a more complicated corridor. It's a bigger area. It needs to go through a federal approval process. So we're teeing that up to that approval process to happen at the end of 24. Implementing the pricing couldn't occur until after that, certainly. So we're a ways off. But throughout all this is that blue bar at the bottom of the screen. There's going to be a lot more discussion, feedback, input. I'm sure you're ready to say this sounds interesting. How can we stay involved? So let's talk about how you can stay involved on each project. So next slide. There we go. I said there are 2 active projects in the Oregon Toll Program. The first is the Regional Mobility Pricing Project. That's the teal outline there. This is a project we're talking about first today. The other one is the I-205 project, which is the dark blue one at the bottom of the screen. But let's start with the teal, the Regional Mobility Pricing Project. 55 miles of corridor on I-5 and I-205. Working south to north on I-5. This is the Boone Bridge in Wilsonville is the start point, up to Columbia Boulevard interchange, all the way up to the north, which is touches the Interstate Bridge Replacement Project up at the top. And then it's all of I-205 in Oregon. So that's the kind of limits that we're talking about here. Next slide there. So how can you get involved? We just published and had out there our discussion draft purpose and need statement. Tells a little more complete story about why we're proposing this project. What are the problems we're trying to address? What are the goals? What else are we hoping this project's going to achieve? We'll send a link to that. I will say right now the document says comments by September 30th. Don't be alarmed. I'm not expecting to turn those around in a day. We're definitely still accepting comments. Please make comments. We really do want to hear from you all on this. We are doing a lot of briefings and presentations like this one to a lot of different audiences. And then we have a series of regional workshops that are starting in November. So be on the lookout for invitations to those. It's a virtual get together. Of course, we'll start to talk through the project in much more detail than this 10-minute overview. So next slide. I-205, this is a 7-mile project oriented around the Abernathy Bridge in Oregon City. So let's skip to the next slide. The outreach on that is much more focused around the smaller geographic area. We're working with community engagement liaisons in 5 different languages to reach voices that we haven't historically heard from in transportation planning work. We're doing a lot of coordination. And as we start to understand the project impacts, we especially want input on the proposed mitigation. So I know we had some questions that came in first, but let me turn this over to Hannah Williams first to bring us home with a discussion of equity. Thanks.
Thanks, Josh. So tolls are new for Oregon, and we have a lot of work to do to figure out how do we make this work for our region. To the right is the Oregon Transportation Commission, and they are the tolling authority for the state. So they will decide the toll rate, and they'll also decide the policy. And so when we go out and talk to people asking them, how do we make tolls work for our region? There's 3 things that we continue to hear, and we're chipping away at that as we work on the toll projects. So the first one is that we need to think about non-tolled transportation options, transit multimodal options. Josh touched on that under investments. We need to think about neighborhood health and safety. We know right now that there's already a lot of diversion on streets that are parallel to the freeway because it's congestion. People take a neighborhood street to maybe go a little bit faster. So what would happen when we lay tolls down? What do we need to do to make neighborhoods safe? And then the third is thinking about affordability. How are tolls going to impact people who may be experiencing a low income or environmental justice communities? So this is a big ask, and so we have some help to help us with this. Can I get the next slide right now, please? So helping us with this task is the Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee, and they are a group of 15 individuals with professional or lived experience in equity and mobility, and they're from all over the region. We have folks from Washington County and people in Southwest Washington too. And so they are looking at the best practices from toll projects all over the country to see how people are looking at equity. And they will be making recommendations for what types of strategies and policies we need to have in our toll program to make tolls easier on communities. Can I get the next slide, please? So they are working away at this, and they have meetings every month. They're open to the public. It's on the last Wednesday of the month, and I invite you to come to one of the meetings or go on the website and watch a recording. Look at the draft policies and strategies that they're working on. You can provide public comment at a meeting, or you could provide it, you can send an email and provide your comments there. And they would love to hear from you, and we would like to help share their work with you too. Can I get the next slide, please? So this is the email where you could send a public comment using this email. You can also go to the website down at the bottom, and then on the left-hand side, click on Advisory Committee, and then scroll down, and you'll get all the information for each meeting, and all the meeting materials are listed there too, and the recordings of each meeting. So you can dig into each of those buckets and what the committee is talking about as ideas for how to make the toll program more equitable. Can I get the next slide, please? So that's the end of our presentation today. I want to center us back to our conversation to kind of to talk about, you know, what are the key problems that we should address with tolling on I-5 and I-205, and what would make tolling successful for you? What would make it more equitable? And what kind of questions do you have for us about the Urban Mobility Office and the toll program? Thank you. Feel free to put any questions in the chat or to unmute and
I see one question in the chat. Where are the toll booths proposed at, in which direction? We're not proposing toll booths. There wouldn't be a stop to pay at a toll booth. There would be gantries, which record electronically the travel along I-5 and I-205. And those would be placed in multiple locations along the freeway, because one of the concepts of this is that you pay for what you are using, you pay for the distance that you're traveling. So in order to capture those trips, we need to record where people are, how far people are traveling along I-5 and I-205. So there would be gantries located in multiple locations.
we have another question about, will the proposed tolls sunset after completion of the projects?
There's no discussion of sunsetting the tolls right now. This is a congestion pricing, and we expect congestion to continue to be an issue in the region. And we see this as a tool to help manage that congestion. So there's not a particularly for the regional mobility project, there's not a project that we're trying to build and pay for.
I've got another one. Can you talk about the process needed for getting approval to use toll revenue for transit and non-highway projects?
You want me to keep going to you, Hannah?
Yeah, go
That would be
for
great.
it.
Thank you.
Sure. We don't know how much funding there is yet, and we won't for a while. Funding decisions are going to be made by the Oregon Transportation Commission. That's a ways off, but that will be a public process, and we will. I think we can point to some priorities that we've continued to point out through today: congestion management, multimodal transportation, neighborhoods health and safety, equity. Those are really the funding priorities that we see throughout this project. But the details of that, about where dollars go to what what efforts are going to be figured out later, and it's going to be very public. So please stay involved in that discussion.
We've got another question about how the funding will be spent and how those decisions are made.
I think I just tried to address both those questions in one response.
Yes.
So
thank you. That was my question. You got it. Thank you, Josh.
Great. Thanks.
You're good. You're fast. You're good. Thank you.
Yeah, this one was sent in to us in writing as well. Very much appreciated. Does ODOT use value methodology workshops to explore how to add value to the projects? So this was an interesting question. As I understand it, this is a form of value engineering. I want to make sure I understand the question correctly. I think is the person who posed the question online right now?
I don't think so. It was John. I don't see him. So I'm not sure exactly what that means. So maybe I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in, but if you can explain your understanding of what that means, that'd be great.
Okay, sure. So value engineering is usually used during construction. It's a way to figure out honestly how to save the projects and taxpayers' money by seeing if there's a way to engineer the project better, to sequence the construction better, to maybe reduce the limits or reduce the materials. So this project's a little different because the gantries and the cameras and the transponders and the readers are kind of all off-the-shelf products that exist already. So there's not a lot of value engineering we can do to kind of reduce those things. Of course, we're going to be looking for ways to keep the costs of installing this program reasonable, but it's not like it's not the same construction processes we'd see on a big bridge. Another question that came in writing: will non-freeway pricing be part of the project? So ODOT and the Oregon Toll Program are only evaluating congestion pricing right now on I-5 and I-205. So that's within their jurisdiction, and that's what we're looking at. But I will say that there are other studies going on in the Portland region. The city of Portland itself is conducting a study that they're nearing a wrap on, which is called Pricing Options for Equitable Mobility, their POEM study. Some really interesting work that's come out of that, really good work. And then Metro has also done a regional congestion pricing study where both of these studies looked at all kinds of different pricing tools, not just highway pricing, but also what if you drew a cordon around like the way London has done, where if you enter the zone, you pay. What if you really worked with the parking pricing, got more aggressive with that. I'm forgetting some of the other way, but ours is very focused on just I-5 and I-205.
Yeah, and I can take this one. So is there an anticipated percentage of revenue that is guaranteed to go to multimodal infrastructure instead of just road expansions? And then will any congestion pricing revenue go to address the $510 million shortfall each year? So to the first part of that question, I would say, I mean, yes, right? Like I think there's absolutely going to be investments for multimodal infrastructure, but the percentage or the amount is not has not been identified yet, and that's part of the kind of public conversation that Josh was referencing earlier. But some of the projects, as you saw in that first map, include some multimodal features. But I think that there's a broader conversation, but there's no kind of identified percentage at this time. And then to the second part of the question, so yes, I would say the toll revenues, again, will help fund kind of the core projects along with other investments. So, again, we've seen that the OTC has put forth the policy that money raised on the corridor will stay on that corridor. But again, that's the revenue collected will go to investments on the corridor. I don't know if there's any other questions that you all wanted to put in the chat.
Or feel free to come off mute.
Did you say, I forget how long you're accepting comments, if people, and like the best way for people to spread the word, if you want folks to do that?
We have not put an end date on the comments yet. This process of developing our purpose and need for the project is truthfully going to extend into 2022. But get in early and get your comments in early, because that's the best way to make sure that we pull them in. Today's the 28th. If we could get comments back from this group and anyone you want to send it to within, so let's say 2 weeks. So by the 15th of October, so middle of October, 15th, that would allow us to make sure that they get incorporated into the next draft.
Cool.
Caitlin, I don't, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say I'll be sending out to everyone who signed up. I'll send out a follow-up email.
Thank you.
And I'll include that date.
Yeah, and it looks like there's.
Sorry.
Go for it, Hannah.
I have a little snippet from our newsletter that has the purpose and need and some information on it. If that's helpful for you, I can send it to you.
Perfect. That'd be great. Thanks.
Looks like there's another question in the chat around the frequency for reviewing future adjustments to toll fees. What would trigger increases to the tolls? Josh, do you want to take that one?
Sure, it's a great question. It's unfortunately in this planning phase, another one that I have to say we don't know yet. Part of our process is going to be, we're going to be setting up a procedure for what those toll rate increases would be, knowing that we're looking to manage congestion. Toll rate increases or changes, I should say changes, because they could go up or down, are really going to be based around those congestion patterns and what we see. Thumbs up. And yes, you brought up the gas tax. Yeah, the gas tax is well behind. And as vehicles get more efficient, which is to be applauded, and as our electrical vehicle infrastructure ramps up, where you have auto manufacturers saying that they're no longer going to make gas cars, which is amazing, but it is pretty dire for agencies such as ODOT and TriMet that rely on gas tax funding.
I have a question for everyone. What's the best way to continue to engage with you? Should we come to you this way in this format and send you links to sign up for updates? Are there other opportunities to engage with you and your members, or how we can keep you, informed and engaged?
I already get updates. I'd be happy to hear from anybody else here to see what the best way is. We got a pretty good response for this webinar here, so I appreciate that. We do send out newsletters. If anybody's, I think most people here are on our newsletter, but if you're not, keep an eye out for that email and I can send it.
Okay, I'll keep sending information your way, Caitlin, and you can shoot it out.
Perfect.
Any feedback, any thoughts on what we're proposing? This is a safe space. We'd love to hear your ideas.
Had you heard about this? Have you heard about the toll projects?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
A couple of yeses.
Nods. Yeah.
Hi, this is Jeff with the West Side Transportation Alliance. I work with Kaylin. I was just hoping to ask a question about, I was going to type it into chat and I was afraid it would get too long. So just about kind of the use of the funds and I'm just thinking, for a lot of our member organizations, the impact is going to be on their employees making that trip on these roads that'll be tolled. And if thinking about, if we want to find multimodal solutions to get people to these destinations, that might necessitate some investments in Washington County so people can reach the destinations that they're needing to either begin or end at. And so just maybe the question is a clarification around the use of the funds as far as we know it now, and how tightly it'll be tied to these corridors, because would it potentially allow for investments in Washington County or in other, sort of employment destinations that people would need to reach after traveling through these corridors? Or is the use of the tolls going to be more tightly confined to the I-5 and I-205 corridors?
Yeah, Jeff, that's a really good question. I think so. One of the, and I think I mentioned this not too long ago, but one of the policies set forth by the OTC has been that money raised on the corridor will stay on the corridor. But I think the work that's ahead of us is defining what a corridor is, alongside kind of broader conversations around transit investments, around multimodal investments. So I think there's some again, partnership conversations and creativity conversations that need to take place in terms of the issues that you've identified, which we've definitely heard, especially as we're kind of engaging folks all over Southwest Washington has some similar concerns. So it's definitely going to be a part of the conversation. And I think there is, again, it has to be part of the broader conversations around partnerships, because it really will take those types of investments. But the OTC, has identified that that sort of policy of money raised on the corridor, staying on the corridor. But again, that definition conversation still needs to take place.
And I'll just add that we definitely are looking at this as an entire transportation system. We're looking at different modes. We're looking at gaps in service. We're looking at what the effects are off of I-5 and I-205 and where people are traveling to and from. So we're not only looking narrowly around the corridors, but definitely when we're looking at effects, we're looking across the region.
Thanks, Adriana, for the comment. It's nice to get some encouragement.
All right, if no more questions.
Well, thanks again
Yeah.
for presenting. I thought this was really informative. I learned a lot, even though I've sort of been following this, I did still learn a lot. And then, like I say, I'll be following up with everybody who signed up. And thanks for asking some great questions.
Great.
Wonderful. Well, this won't be the last time you see us, and anytime you need something, please just reach out to me and I'll connect you with the right person at ODOT. And thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you. We really appreciate you giving us the space.